Welcome to another Perspectives podcast here. Josue and Chase here. We're wanting to do something a little bit different. Like we've always mentioned, we've wanted to use these podcasts as a way to share thoughts and just get into conversations. And in light of everything going on around in this nation, currently in the U.S. where we are, we kind of wanted to speak to everything that's been happening. We recorded a podcast not too long ago. It was just a conversation we were having, but we felt that it was good. And so we're going to blend both of those as well as this one, just to kind of bring you a fuller, I guess you could say, conversation as we speak to the issue of racism and just everything that's going on currently in the country. Those are just some of the things that we wanted to do today.
Yeah, it'll be good because this will kind of be a little bit of behind the scenes for y'all. Because it was something in the first conversation. It was just kind of like something casual that we had before. I think it was the Brazil podcast.
Yeah.
And something that just kind of naturally came up. And in talking with Josue about it over the last couple weeks, and just seeing everything that's gone on, there's been a couple like additional things that like he wanted to talk about, that I wanted to talk about, and hopefully just in this, our goal is just to like share our individual perspectives and just grow from that. Conversation is one of the key things that the Lord's given us to understand truth,
right,
and to have a fuller understanding of potentially what He would want us to do in these types of situations. So it'll be good. We hope that y'all enjoy it.
Yeah.
And so here's part one of the conversation with part two following.
Yeah.
Have you been seeing the conversations that Reward has been putting out?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
On Instagram?
Yeah. So he had the Race and Grace one. I watched that and I thought that was really good. And there were some thoughts that I had around that I'd love to like follow up with you and him about to get your thoughts on and things like that. Because that would be, I think that would be a good like topical thing for us, and then just being able to process everything as well.
Yeah,
because I wanted to give you a little bit of space to kind of like digest, I guess, everything with that. Because I saw your post and everything, and so like, how are you doing?
No, I thought it was like an interesting time. So I think I don't know if Jim, maybe a guy named Will Cole? Probably not.
No.
He's it's funny because he's actually because I saw Yvonne's video like the day before.
Yeah.
And I think that following day I was on Facebook just kind of like scrolling around. And his girlfriend is actually black. And he posted something in
Will, he's the one from JOT, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he posted something and I was just reading and I was like, wow, that's just a lot of perspective, especially like for him, it's kind of admit a lot of those things. And so I was like, you know what? Because I usually I like to have more like personal conversations where it's more like one-on-one versus just posting something online. Not that there's nothing wrong with that, but I was like, you know what? This one kind of,
That's your style. Like, it's you as an individual.
Yeah. And that one, I don't know, that one I really felt kind of like just, it reminded me of that story. Like that story kind of just really, I remember I went back to that moment. And I was like, that was really an interesting time, and we really had to like navigate through that moment, because we weren't looking for trouble or anything. We were just trying to get a ride back to the house, and then that just kind of hit us, and so I remember thinking about that, and I was like, that was very similar, in some aspects, and not. I don't know if it would have escalated to that point, but I'm glad that we didn't even have to find out. And so that was very interesting. And even just, I don't know, seeing the videos, that video in particular, and then just hearing like different people talk about different things, I'm just like, I don't get it. I don't get it. Because it's like there's people that, for example, they're like, oh, we got to wait for all the facts and all these things. I'm like, okay, so does what fact that comes out is going to change the fact that the man's dead? You know, I'm like, that's the bottom line, right? Whether he was a criminal, like we don't just kill pedophiles, we don't just kill murderers. They go to jail like they're supposed to. Like we don't just kill people, you know, for doing bad things. They go to jail. That's why there is some kind of, you know, system in play, you know, for things like that. You know, so I feel like some people are just like, we have to wait for all the facts. I'm like, well, I feel like you're trying to justify something that doesn't need to be justified. Like we all see. Like I don't know what the reason they did that, you know, but the end result is still the same. You
Yeah.
know? Shannon Sharp, he said, I don't know if it was his grandma, he also quotes his grandparents a lot. He says, the road to hell is paved with good intention. Is it the road to hell or
Yeah.
something like that? It's paved with good intentions. You know, it's like it could have been something where you thought you were doing something good, but I mean, you really gotta take all the drawbacks that comes with it. You know, take all the drawbacks. Whether you maybe you love black people, I don't know. I mean, that doesn't change anything. The fact that the man is dead is probably the biggest thing, you know. And so, I don't know. Sometimes I just feel like people are trying to justify, you know. So the whole let's wait for all the results. I'm like, well, let's wait for all
The facts.
the
and
facts.
things
I'm like, but
that.
what does that change exactly? You
Yeah.
know, the man's dead. Like I don't. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's not really something that like I would fight somebody on. I mean, they can feel that way, but my point is still just like the man's dead.
Yeah.
You know, that somebody lost their son. Somebody lost, you know, whatever future he wanted to have. Like that ended at that moment.
Yeah.
And that's because you know these guys want to kind of take matters into their own hands. You know, and
Yeah.
so I don't know. I mean, it's an unfortunate situation. But then, I mean, there's people that jump to the, you know, people of the same. Well, there's black on black crime. I'm like, well, yeah, there's white on white crime too. So what's your point,
Yeah.
right? That's not really a good argument, you know. If this was truly something that was race related, like don't jump to the conclusion that there's black on black crime because there's also white on white crime, you
Yeah.
know. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just a lot. And normally I'm not the one that like speaks out on all these different things.
Yeah.
But like I said, this one was just a little bit different because, you know, heck, I mean, I have my friends who go running all the time, you know, and even my friend Tafar, his girlfriend, posted something, a quote that he said while they were having that conversation because she's white.
Yeah.
And she was talking to him and he told her, you know how when girls don't walk downtown late at night by themselves because of you never know what might happen to you.
Yeah.
And then he was like, sometimes that's how we feel in certain places, in certain areas. And I was like, yeah, you know, certain places, certain areas. Because some people are more so hyper like alert when it comes to that stuff towards like everything's race related. I'm not that guy. Like I don't think everything's race related. But I think even in that, I think I might turn a blind eye to certain things because I don't want to think that, oh man, you did this because I was black, you know. So
Yeah.
I don't know. There's definitely a lot of different ways you can kind of go about it, you know, a lot of different things. But I mean, it's definitely something that's true. You know, I had this guy that I worked with. He messaged me on Instagram. He was like, man, I just want to reach out and see, like, he's like, I just want to educate myself. Like, he's like, I would have never imagined something like that would have happened. What can I do to, you know, get better as a person or whatever? And I was like, you even reaching out, you just even shows that, you know, you care about this, not just something that happened. You're just like, well, too bad. You know, it was like, I mean, I told him, I was like, man, you don't have to become an advocate. You know, no one's asking you to become an advocate for stuff like that, but you know, learn to stand up for things that are true, right? Learn to stand up for things that are true, things that are right, even if you're in the minority of it, right? You know, kind of learning to stand up for things that are true, and so, you know, just kind of just encouraging them, like, man, I don't see like you being that guy who would do something crazy like that. And yeah, I mean, I understand you want to get better as a person and just kind of grow and all that. So yeah, I mean, those are just some, you know, some of the thoughts kind of had during that time. Because, yeah, I feel like since then, like, I got on Facebook the other day, and there was another thing that I saw. I didn't even get to watch it yet, but I was like, man, that's just crazy. Things like these just always just seem to happen, you know? And so, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. And it sucks. And like, I know, because this has been like a thought or something that I've been thinking about for probably like the past, I think like a year and a half or so, is just in terms of like reconciliation. And like, as far as like us as a society, like, when is everything going to be okay? And when is everything going to be peaceful? And what does that look like through the lens of like our faith and everything like that? And it's just like, because one of the things that like I keep going back to as like just as a Christian, and then as a person who wants to have like proper expectations, I guess would be like a thing, is because I have like, because one of the things I'm wondering is like how, like basically how can we fix this, being like a pragmatic person in that, instead of just like me wanting to sit by and then just like see all this crap happen and then see all like people on both sides of the conversation like complain or different things like that, and then as well seeing the media trying to enrage everyone. And I think that like just from like my perspective on it, I think that's why some of the people who were like, let's wait for the facts to come out, were saying that. I definitely think some of the people who were saying that were trying to say like find some way of like justifying the wrong that was done. But I definitely think there was some that were just like, hey, like we need to be mindful and attentive that like the media is trying to divide us. And so from there, like we need to like decipher, or not even decipher, but find out the facts for ourselves, and then find the truth. Because I mean, it's the same with a pastor with a message. Is like we can't just take his word as final authority. We have to compare like his message to the word. And so for me, like one of the things that I want to see is like, realistically, is it a proper expectation for me to have that things are going to be all right? Like that's the thing that I even want to know is like, can I have this expectation that we can't even have like reconciliation? Like, and then from there, it like, if I can have that hope, like what is it based on and how can we pursue that? And one of the things that I keep going back to is in Ephesians. Where is it? I don't know if it's 2 or 4.
Wait, what does this say?
It basically talks about how reconciliation can only happen through Christ.
2.
Unity in the body.
2.
Yeah. Okay. For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility, by abolishing the law of commandments. It's interesting because expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of two, so making peace, and might reconcile us both to God in one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. And he came and preached peace to you that were far off, and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access to one Spirit, to the Father. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you're a fellow citizen of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and Jesus Christ. And so for me, one of the things, because I think when this originally came up, this thought was whenever a lot of the church got enraged at John MacArthur saying just preach the gospel whenever it comes to like the race conversation, things like that. And for me, like, I think there's multiple ways to preach the gospel, because obviously faith without works is dead. And I think works is another way of sharing the gospel.
Right.
But for me, I think one of the things that us as believers need to have as an understanding is like, the Lord says, like, there's not going to be any reconciliation outside of the body. And once we submit to that and understand, like, that's truth, and unfortunately, that's just freaking way things are. Like, then from there, I think we have a framework of understanding, like, and having the proper expectations of people, but then as well, then having the proper expectations of people within the church.
Yeah.
Because as far as people outside of the church, like, we know what's good for them as far as like the Lord's commandments and boundaries, but we can't expect for them to be obedient because they're not in the Spirit yet. It's something that we hope for and that we share the gospel so that they can be in obedience, but it's not something that like we can actually have a like hope for in terms of like our life and countenance and things like that. And so I think same for us, like in the like reconciliation conversation is like, as much as it sucks, I think us as believers need to understand that those outside of the church, from what I can see, and obviously I only have a limited perspective, I don't know if this is the full truth of it, but I don't know if there will ever be reconciliation to those who are outside the church. But where we as a church need to be accountable is to those within the church, to make sure that they are pursuing this with everything that they have, like everything that they have. And I think, well, I don't know if I could say that, because even with that, one of the thoughts that I've had that I don't know if this is true or not is I think the Lord's given us individuality and individual interests for a reason. So therefore, like, I think there's just so many interests and so many causes throughout the world that if each of us were equally devoted to all those, I don't know if we can like effectively pursue those, and there wouldn't be leadership in any of those areas. So, because I mean, whether it's homelessness, race, poverty, orphans, widows, like whatever, like there's so much wrong out there that if we try to do that. And so from there, I think it is in a way okay for us to have areas that God gives us a passion to serve for. But where I do think there are some wrong things is some of those people who should have a passion and are called to serve in those areas aren't. And so, because I will say that's one of the things that I like through that thought that I'm still trying to figure out that I don't like is that everyone is trying to be like, everyone should stand up for X, Y, or Z, whether it's abortion, whether it's race, whether it's whatever. And from there, it's like, no, because at the same time, we don't, as I think it's 1st or 2nd Corinthians, we don't ask an arm to do what a foot does. And so like there's a need to play our roles. And I think from there as a church, we can then trust that the sufficient people will be there to bring about like his kingdom to earth, like what he wants. But at the same time, I think that will only be within the body of Christ rather than outside of it.
Yeah.
And like, it sucks because we're also engaging this sinful world every day. And so like, it's something that we constantly have to bring ourselves back to. And that's even something in Hebrews 2, if if I remember right, is therefore we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard, the truth, lest we drift away from it. And so it's something that we always we have to focus on what the truth is, what God's actual promises are, and then from there pursue those.
Yeah.
And so, because here's the thing: whenever Jesus comes back, and we have the new world and new heavens, or whenever we die, this bullcrap we have to deal with ain't gonna be a thing anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I just that's one of the thoughts that I've had that's just super difficult. And it sucks because for me growing up, seeing you, for example, go through that, it sucks. Because I don't want that on any of my friends, regardless of ethnicity or anything like that. Because obviously Asians get made fun of too for being super smart and things like that. But at the same time, white people get made fun of for not being super athletic. And so we each have our own privileges and things like that. And I know if, say, we were to go over, move over to Japan or China or something like that, privileges are different over there.
Yeah.
Because at that point we look a little bit different. The racism would look different over there. And it's and it's a fact of it is all over the place.
Yeah.
If you just look at unfortunately the Chinese government versus the Uyghurs right now, which are those Muslims I think in northwest China, they're getting oppressed right now. They don't have privileges. Even I know there's Korean, Japanese, Chinese racism that goes on. And I'm sure there's some in South America too. It's a fact of this world. And while I'll definitely say us as Americans have had a different history in it. It's definitely I think we can get so focused on our own little bubble that sometimes we can forget that oh wait, slavery is still going on over in Libya and over in Africa, things like that. To whereas here it's a little bit different. And so it's just it's tough because I feel like I have this insight that is depressing on the surface. But if you dig deeper, it's good.
Yeah.
And something that we could build hope on.
Yeah, I feel like with just preach the. I actually just recently heard about that too. The just preach the gospel thing message. That a lot of people kind of got upset because, like you said, it sounds good, but in aspect if there's no works involved with it, and it's well, these things are still happening, right? These things are still going to continue. If we're not speaking against evil, which is something we should be doing in the church, so it's what gospel are we preaching exactly? Jesus got on these people for the way they were. You can even see in a way how he brought reconciliation between the Jews and the Samaritans. Yeah. Right? How the Samaritans thought the Jews were, less than them, and all these things. You even see how Jesus navigated through that. So I'm this issue has been going on for years, and
it's way before America.
Yeah, by simply just saying preach the gospel, that's part of it. It's just bringing people back together, so there's not this division because of race or whatever other factors that are kind of that our world deals with today. So I don't know. I think there's it's a deeper conversation, but
and that's what I wish John would have been able to articulate. But then again, that's the fail of the individual.
Yeah,
it
happens. Yeah,
because those of us who have an understanding of the gospel should know that works are paired with our faith. And then as well, that like as it says in First John, that the world will know us by our love, and love is not a feeling; it's an action.
Yeah, it's true.
And so it's yeah, like, and while I definitely think speech is an action, there's physical action
Yeah.
in terms of things around your local community and things like that. And that was one of the things that I really liked, like this thought I had about the Jordan documentary, which if you don't agree with this thought, definitely just let me know, because this is just my perspective and like a thought that I had that I still haven't really like fully digested, I would say. The whole thing about Republicans buy sneakers too. So one of the things in the documentary they went over is like, hey, he did a lot of things behind the scenes. Like he contributed to that dude's campaign. Like he just didn't expressly articulate it in the political stance that a lot of people would normally say is a political stance, when there's many ways to do it. And like this thought that I had was like, if the goal of activism is to create change, and Jordan created so much change by not speaking out, but rather by example and behind the scenes good works, is it not a possibility that today we would create more change if we just shut our mouths and actually did the work that we've been talking about so much? Because, and I mean, I think it's just this whole idea that these systems that we set up are going to save us, rather than, you know, we're probably better off as just like our local communities investing in those, rather than depending on this big old system to come out and save us and things like that. And while stimulus checks are nice, for dang sure, because both of us have been enjoying those.
Yeah.
It's something that, guess what? Like, we can't fully depend on that.
Yeah.
Like if it's something where anyone in this community is in need, like go to Our Calling.
Yeah.
That's that nonprofit in Dallas that's doing a lot of good work. Go to Dallas Food Bank. Go to the YMCA. Go to those things like that. But I mean, obviously, that gets down to a deeper, like more economic type theory of the fact that nonprofits are there to replace government, essentially. But I mean that's a deeper talk. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't know, man. I definitely think that today, what we've been taught is that the greatest contribution that we can have to the world is our social media account or our speech, rather than action.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think Jesus did a great combination of both, which is something I think that we can pursue.
Yeah.
Which honestly, like as a friend, like I think you're doing a good job of, because like you're not just out there like posting things on social media, but you're out there like serving people as well, which is something that I really admire.
Yeah, I mean, no, man. Yeah, no, I agree to your thought process there. I mean, I think the only thing I would add is just some people have to talk. Like if you have the I guess the knowledge about a certain topic, or the way to communicate a certain topic so it makes sense, then yeah, of course. Because some people just say things and then you get questioned, like, well, no, but I don't think that should prevent someone from talking if you really feel that passionate about it. But like you said, actions also speak so much louder. There's people that donate to causes, and the causes have people that are representatives that are speaking. So that's the same process that you're talking about. Not everybody's able to be, because if everybody's speaking, then it's like, who's working?
Yeah.
Right? Because there's people that donate to different causes. Because there's something like in the Black community sometimes where it's like, unless you speak, then it's like what exactly are you doing? But some people don't understand that there's people that have been fighting the same battle. They're putting their the resources they have behind certain issues, even though they might not be able to, communicate or speak about it. And that's okay. You don't have to criminalize people for taking different approaches to things. Because some people are just talking it, but they don't do anything behind it.
Yeah, and that
So
was what I was about to say, because you said if everyone's out there working, like who's speaking, which is such a good thing, because there needs to be like awareness created. But at the same time, if everyone's speaking, who's doing the work?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so there's that balance there that's difficult. And I mean, I think that's even something kind of tangent here. I mean, I think that's even like a whole thing about like our faith as well, which I think we've talked about this idea that I had before of like our faith is full of tensions and balance, to whereas you have like the balance of grace and truth and love. You have the balance of justice and mercy. You have the balance of the fact that, you know, it would be better to die today and be with God in heaven. And then also this other side of like, hey, like God wants us to live this life abundantly and to fulfill our calling here, and that balance there. And then as well, even like the part about justified by grace alone through Christ alone, but then the importance of works. And so like there's this whole balance in our faith that is there in every area that is so unique because it makes certain things not mutually exclusive that would normally be, such as justice and mercy, which that's still something that I mean, I haven't even really dove into that, because that's something that I definitely struggle with is like, what does it mean to pursue like justice and mercy? Because for me, like one of the things that it's a thought that I've had, which I will say this to you just because like you are one of my good friends and like I trust our friendship and that you know like my heart behind this. But just as like those, like if we want to go down this route of those who are descendants of those who had slaves and who did the bad things in the past, if we want to go down that route, like they need to basically like apologize and take ownership for the things that their ancestors did, then the other side needs to also be willing at the same time or before, I don't know, to extend forgiveness to those. And from there, like, I don't know what the proper balance of like justice and mercy would be in that. Like, is it something like reparations and then from there we're all good? Or is it something that, hey, you know what, this sucked, but guess what? Now, because I'm a person of faith and I have a passion for this, I'm going to pursue to give as many opportunities to those who wouldn't potentially have as many opportunities because of what's happened in the past. Like I'm going to give them as many opportunities as possible, and serve them and give them whatever assistance I can, in my life, because I mean, I'll definitely say it's a little bit of a tangent, but I mean, I'll definitely say from like I don't know if it's an economics argument or like a political stance, but I definitely agree a lot more with like the equality of opportunity rather than equality of outcome, which is basically kind of like, in a way, capitalism and versus communism / socialism, in terms of like going out there on merit and making sure everyone has equal opportunities, because that again gets into like the individuality topic that God gives us, individual passions, desires, and everything like that. And if we were to go to equality of outcome, like, all right, who decides what's going to be the baseline outcome? And guess what? It may be okay for person A, but not for person B's personality and things like that. And so like there's things with that, but yeah, like going back to it, like I think like I don't know what the balance is as far as like, hey, I'm gonna pursue repentance and whatever other words would be there, and then as well the people on the other side of the conversation are gonna pursue forgiveness and things like that. Like I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's an interesting thought because it's like obviously the world is not going to do that because
Exactly.
that's just how the world is. Even I feel like even among believers, that might even still be a struggle still.
Yeah.
In a perfect godly scenario, that would be like the course of action.
Yeah.
But we know feelings get involved, things get involved, and just there's a lot that gets involved with all of that. And so, like you said, yeah, I mean, what is that balance like between? Because yeah, I mean, if there's some kind of thought or whatever that goes on one side towards repentance, trying to like, man, this did happen. Because I feel like sometimes people just like pretend like the whole slavery thing didn't happen. I'm like, that's disrespectful. That's because people lost their, that's dumb. Like, don't.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, to what level are you willing to hold every white person you see for what happened when they clearly didn't have anything to do with it? You know
Well,
what I'm
and
saying?
and then as well, like one of the things that like a thought that I have in line with that
Yeah.
is like maybe someone just moved over from Ireland like a year ago.
Yeah.
Like, and in our society, we're holding them just as equal as someone who has been here for 200 years.
Right. So
it's
that's kind
difficult.
of that's kind of the tough thing because there's too many if ends
If thens.
if thens that could arise. But yeah, I mean, in a perfect godly scenario, that's what would happen. But obviously, we don't see that happening because people have agendas, they have different things that kind of come up. So yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing to kind of even trying to figure out like what's the balance there. So I think for me, like I've always tried to just treat people like I want to be treated. You know what I'm saying? I've always tried to do the whole loving of your enemies type of deal. Because there's certain things that till Jesus come might never really get dealt with. That's just the fallen world. We're trying to use, like you said, fallen systems. We're trying to bring reconciliation when if somehow we could all just come to the knowledge of God and know God like we need to be doing, hopefully we can deal with these things a little bit better. But we know that that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it makes it harder to address certain things. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's I think it's tough. But as individuals, I feel like we can do our part.
Yeah.
That's all I can do. I know that I can do my part. And with those that I may have these kinds of conversations with, I might be able to share something. They might be able to share something. We learn, we grow. And so we're all better for it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, that's perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There's literally, we'll all like leave from that conversation or whatever better for it. Because if not, like, I don't, like, I never, like, I just don't see certain people coming to agreement on things,
Yeah.
because it's just like, well, F you or whatever,
Yeah.
at least those kinds of conversations. So yeah, I mean, for me, I always try to do things personally, like on a personal level, how do you impact this? And hopefully as I'm doing it personally, that can impact those that are around me. And hopefully through that, we can cause more of a change. Whereas trying to like, I want to do it any other way. I don't know if that really works, but
So that is I think we've talked about this before because that is one of the things behind perspectives of why like we chose that name. Like one, I want to again get to the point that I love that you brought up is, and it's a thought that I've explored a little bit that I definitely think is something that God wants to symbolize through Christ is the redemption of the society depends on the integrity of the individual. To whereas you have to be willing to take on the burden of your calling, which for Jesus was the sins of the world. For us, it's going to be different. To then have a fulfilling life and live basically by the willingness of, or by the will of God. And it's something that it's not by the integrity of like automatically by like a group or things like that, which is where like identity, politics, but then as well, this silly idea of intersectionality comes in. But the individual is key. And as well with that, I want to go back to the burden part because I think it's very specific. Because like, I mean, I think you know me. I like to be specific with words. Because in Matthew, like the Lord says, like any burden that I give you is going to be light. That yoke will be light. And so from there, like when I say burden, I don't mean something that's heavy, overbearing, things like that, but something that we can take on in full faithfulness and obedience. So I love that you brought up the individual because that's where I do think where us as the church can get past, not past, that's not right, be able to endure and get through all of this is by seeing people as individuals rather than parts of groups. Because I mean, obviously well, one of the things, tangent here, is, I mean, Lisa Sharon Harper, I don't know if you've heard any of her stuff, like she's brought up, especially in some of KB's songs, that basically race is a construct, but ethnicity is something that's true. And so from there, like, honestly, me, I don't even, ever since like I thought of that, I was like, I don't even like using the word race or racism, things like that. Like ethnocentrism, I think is a lot better word. Because of a variety of factors, but no, like once we start seeing people as individuals, then from there we can move past this whole us versus them, group versus group thing. And I think that's something that only the gospel makes way for because he gives us individual value and identity in creating each of us in his image and a piece of his image.
Yeah.
And so like that's something that I think is so key that we have yet to progress to in terms of this conversation is we're all, I think, sitting here, which I think it is a natural progression in terms of the conversation. We are sitting here of just like, okay, what can whites do? What can blacks do? What can Asians do? Things like that. Instead of like, hey, like, okay, we can address, I think we need to address some of these things with nuance, which I think is something that we've lost, which is addressing pretty much all of the if-then kind of things as we can. And then coming to agreements, but then as well being willing to compromise in different areas, like all of us. But then progressing to like, hey, we need to start viewing ourselves as individuals or else this whole thing will never go away. And I love that you brought up perspectives and this whole thing of the individual, because one of the thoughts of why perspectives came into play is this thought that I have is like the culture is the summation of all and the average of all the individual perspectives in that culture. Because if you think about it, like a culture in terms of their values and things like that are often the majority of the people within that culture. So for us here in America, probably if we want to be real, like money is probably one of the highest values because of how our culture is set up. And then other things as well that like we know what goes into American culture. Like hip hop is a big thing of American culture because that's something that each of these individual perspectives like pays attention to, listens to, things like that. With our trips, experiences, podcasts, things like that, what we want to do is to be able to bring these opportunities to shift these individual perspectives. Because then from there, as you said, that I definitely believe will happen, is once these people's perspectives grows, they see the world for what it really is, get outside of this American bubble, come to a further understanding of like God's view on the world, then their perspective changes a little bit and they're able to start to have these casual conversations with their friends that we will never meet. And then from there, progressively, as more and more of these perspectives change, the culture changes. But it all starts at the individual. And that's something that I think a lot of campaigns, movements, people in general get wrong, is we want to go, hey, how can we find these target markets of like, as far as marketing goes, of like, hey, let's focus on these people. Then, hey, let's focus on these people, instead of being like, no, like we need to get down to the individual level. Because that's where, as you said, like personal conversations comes in. And then from there, you can grow their perspective through conversation, travel, whatever. And then from there, like through more and more people growing, I think the culture changes.
Yeah, I mean, they had, what was the thing, bro? Yeah, no, I was going to say
what you think.
I think it's crazy, specifically even speaking to the church, because, as believers, we know one day we're going to stand before Jesus. And so, we're not going to have all the excuses that we use today.
Yep.
And so that's why I kind of led to, like, on an individual basis, how do you respond even when, things won't be like how we want it to be, because James talks about God doesn't judge with partiality like we do. He says if you see a rich man comes into your church and you give him a preferable seating, and the poor man comes in, you tell him to go stand in the back, you've become a judge and you're judging with partiality, and God doesn't do that. And so how much more when it comes to a race thing where it's like, oh, I don't feel comfortable with these people, right? We even do that with like people from the Middle East. Oh, I don't feel comfortable with these people because they look like that. It's just, so for me, I'm like, like you meet a lot of Muslim people that are very peaceful people, and for whatever reason, whether it's the news or whatever it is, you can grow up just fearing people of that ethnicity to where you might not ever even have a conversation with them because of whatever reason. So then it's like in your heart, you become a judge, So for me, I'm always like, I really don't want to have those conversations with God one day when I get there. So let me just deal with those things now while I can. So, but that's all I was going to say about that.
No, yeah. I love that you brought that up. Because, whenever I recorded with Tadashi, that was something he brought up too, was the sin of partiality.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. But I appreciate you, like, opening up about that, having that conversation and things like that. Because I texted Reward on Wednesday when I listened to it. And I was like, hey, man, like, I have some thoughts I'd love to talk to you about. He was like, yeah, man, like we'll chop it up here in a little bit. And I was like, yeah, bet, man. But I've been thinking about that a lot the last couple of days.
Yeah, one of my friends was like, you guys should totally talk about that in your podcast. I was like, really? She was like, yeah. I was like, all right, cool. Welcome back to the conversation. Like we mentioned earlier, this is part 2, and we kind of just wanted to continue on that conversation that we were having and bring some more clarity to some of the things we mentioned in the last podcast. And so, so here we are.
Yeah, that'll be good. And things have kind of evolved a little bit over the last couple of weeks. Like part 1 of the conversation, we were talking a lot about, if I remember right, like the Ahmaud Arbery situation that came up, and as well just kind of reconciliation potentially in general. And so I think with this, it's something that I know you want to do is kind of bring actually share the stories that we kind of
Yeah.
alluded to in the first part,
Right.
but as well potentially talk about this from like the standpoint of the church,
Mm-hmm.
and then also talk about everything that's happened with George Floyd
Mm-hmm.
and the reaction to all of that and
Right.
just kind of our perspectives on that. And so, yeah, man, do you just want to kick us off
Sure.
sharing just those couple stories?
Yeah, I was going to share two stories that kind of always brings me back to this whole issue.
Yeah.
I remember one was probably I was a maybe sophomore in high school, and there was a group of me and two of my other guy friends. One was Puerto Rican, the other one is half Korean, half Mexican.
Yeah.
And so we get dropped off on a Saturday. We're walking back to the front of the school. So his mom, one of their moms, was coming to pick us up from the school trip, and there was this camouflage Jeep that pulls up next to us, and all the guys that were in there, they're white. Probably they look big, like
Yeah.
they said, the country fed guys, but they all look like they came from hunting. You could see the gear, and they had like fishing rods and guns and things like that in the background. So they pulled up next to us, and so we didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
And then so they started talking to us. But the way they were talking to us, you could tell it was a way to intimidate us. You could tell there was a way to try to rattle us and just get some kind of reaction over us. So there was about five of them in the truck, and there was three of us. And so I've always been the more calm one out of all the groups that I was
Yeah.
in. And so in that moment, the thing that came to mind was like, yo, you just gotta chill. If the term is being punked, right? If you gotta be punked in this moment, then that's okay. But you gotta make sure that you guys kind of survive or go through this
Yeah.
situation right here. And I remember I could look at my friends, and you can kind of just see how their expression was changing in terms of like the blood rising and them just being super frustrated with what was going on. And so those guys are still talking to us, and they're laughing, right? They're mocking us. They're saying a lot of crazy things, and then they drive away. And so we're kind of just left there thinking like, what just happened, right? In the midst of that, we see them drive away, and then they stop, and then they pull back, they reverse, they pull up next to us again, and then they just start going in. They start talking even more and just saying a lot of different things. And at that moment, it's one of those moments where it's like it's easy to throw a ration, out the door, out the window, and just react, right? But there was like a calmness. I don't know if it was a fear or whatever it was in that moment, but it's just, we were intentionally targeted because in that moment we're minorities, and they saw that there was more of them. They had the advantage, superiority, whatever word you want to use there, and they intentionally used that, in a sense, to try to bully us or punk us or intimidate us or whatever. And in that moment, honestly, we took it. In that moment, we took it because I didn't really see there was another way around that situation, for example. And stuff like that, that one really sticks with you because that could have been one of those situations that could have led me to say, man, you know what? I'm done with white people, for example, right? Because it was that bad, the kind of conversation, the things that were being said, right?
Yeah.
And one of the other stories that I shared was this was probably 2009, 2010.
Yeah.
I remember working at McDonald's, and I was told to go clean the tables. And so I'm there cleaning the tables. And it was a slow afternoon, and there weren't a lot of customers in the store. But there was this one family, two kids, probably around the age of 4 and 5, and then their grandma. As they're sitting there, I'm not really thinking much. I'm just wiping the tables. I get close to the family, and then the little kid, who's probably about 6, he looks up at grandma. He said, "Hey, grandma, look, it's a nigger." And so that, I just froze because I couldn't
Yeah.
believe what I just heard, you know? And so in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, grandma is going to obviously scold her grandson for what she just said. And grandma proceeded to say, "Hey, you don't call them that." And so I was like, oh, wow. Wow, grandma. Like, this was the moment that you had to, set an example right? Instill something different in your grandson, and she just let that slide by because you don't call them that. So it's like, okay, then what do you call them whenever I'm not around, right? What do you call them at home? What do you call them? Just a lot of thoughts like that came to my mind, and so it kind of led me to a point where there's this famous saying that goes that it takes a village to raise a child, right?
Yeah.
Speaking to the environment they're in, depending on the environment that you're in, that's how you're going to be raised. That's how you're going to learn values and different things like that. And so we all know that hate is something that's taught at a very young age, for example, right? Prejudice, being prejudiced, or these little biases that we have towards certain people, all of these things are taught at a very young age. And so if that's true, then the same on the opposite must be true as well, that you can instill love at a very young age. And so that's what I'm hoping for us to, as a people, as believers especially, that's what we're called to do anyways, right? How do we teach love? How do we teach our children, the next generation, to where we're removing these biases, where we are taking away these little things that lead to something that could be disastrous later on as they grow up. And the last example I wanted to share wasn't even something that was racial or anything, but it was something that had to do with I guess you could say presumption. Or
Yeah.
I remember being at a store, and this was probably maybe 3 years ago, I want to say. I was at a store. I was next in line. The ladies that were in front of me, they had a couple things. They're about to check out. And I don't know what I bought, but it was probably just one or two items at the store.
Yeah.
And the ladies kept staring at me, right? So in my mind, I started assuming, why are these ladies staring at me? And my mind just went to the worst things. There were African Americans like me. So my mind just went to the worst things. I was like, maybe they're thinking about this. Maybe they don't like me. Maybe this, that, and the other. Come to find out, the ladies, they're like, hey, we notice you only have one thing. Do you want to get in front of us? And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
It was at that moment that I realized our minds can do that to us, where we just assume the worst about people, right? We can assume the worst about people without even actually knowing what's on somebody's heart, without even actually knowing the person. Because in that moment, I judged those ladies, right? Judged them without even knowing them,
Yeah.
right? Even though they wanted to do something that was for my good, but I had judged them for something else. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where some of the things that I wanted to bring up.
Yeah. And that's what I think, going off of that last story, because I have thoughts about each of those. Like the last one that you talked about, I think that goes into a couple different things. One of them I'm going to save to the end, but I think that's what the proper meaning of being judgmental is because I've had this conversation with my family multiple times, and we've had that on the podcast before, where the thing is, like, the Lord does call us to judge. Example I've brought up multiple times: if you say a girl's pretty, guess what? You judged her as being good looking.
Yeah.
The only time that we don't like judgments is whenever they're bad. But that line of also being a proper judge, but then also being a hypocrite, is kind of this line of being judgmental, which is judging without the facts,
Right.
of kind of presuming, as you said, guilt or something like that. And that's something that it gets down to the point, which is something I'll just kind of bring up now and we could discuss a little bit later, is like kind of these grand narratives in our culture of saying that, oh, all black people are thieves, all white people are racist, things like that. Like, those are the types of things that we need to break down and view people on an individual level, which I think the gospel makes a unique way for, and God creating each of us in his image with unique individuality and individual traits. I don't see any other religion or faith making way for that. Obviously outside of Judaism. That's another conversation.
Yeah.
But going back to the first story that you shared, a thought that I had about that is that's kind of why I think the Lord really impresses on us the importance of humility, and those of us who have power, influence, whatever you want to call it, using that as a gift to serve the Lord, but then as well not being arrogant in that. Because in that situation, it's something where those kids in the Jeep had the upper hand in that situation because they had the guns and fishing rods and things like that. And so I think from that, it could be in the method of them being racist in that moment, but that's something where people need to not abuse their power or the things that God's given them.
Right.
And that's something that, again, we can only have through the lens of our faith. I mean, I don't know what other faiths say about power and things like that, but specifically from a Christian standpoint, speaking just to people of our faith, that's something that we need to be very, very far away from.
Right.
That's something that we need to strive to be against. As far as the second story goes, I think there's a couple pairings there that I think is good for us to keep in the back of our mind. So I definitely agree with you that hate is something that is taught oftentimes, which is one of the reasons why I tend to lean towards a lot of the things that our country struggles with. It's gonna take, unfortunately, time and generations for things to get better. And I think that's kind of why there's such an emphasis in the Bible about incremental improvement, because I think the Lord's symbolizing something there where things are not going to change in a day. But if you get 1% better each day, things are going to be good. And that's almost kind of what the process of sanctification is becoming more and more in line with the Holy Spirit, and being led by Him, so that you can get a little bit better each day.
Right.
And so potentially that's something that I think we need to keep in the back of our mind, that we just have to have long, patient suffering, and all of us in the midst of this. Because the thing is, for those who are experiencing the brunt of racism across the world, because I mean that's the thing. I mean, Asian countries are racist as well. European, African countries are racist as well, and so definitely it's something that our country has uniquely struggled with, but it's not something that's just an American struggle.
Right.
But it's something that we need to keep in the back of our mind of this is something that it's something that those who experience the brunt of racism need to keep in their mind. And maybe that's also a kind of reason why grace and patience is something that can be focused on. And I mean, I'm still definitely trying to figure out the balance between justice and grace and what that even looks like justice and mercy. But as well, for those of us who belong to the category of those who are committing those racist acts, that's something that we have to keep in the back of our mind. Because it's something that these kind of grand narrative criticisms that come towards all of us of whites being racist, that's something that we just have to deal with for a little bit. Even if you know that you're not a person that commits racist acts, it's something that we need to have long-suffering patience for, and something that we need to be willing to be humble to go through that persecution, or whatever you want to call it. But then as well, understand that, one, the Lord sees our hearts and understands who we are. But then as well, those people in your life who are true friends also see your heart.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, but something I kind of wanted to go off of in terms of that, or I should say the third story, which is the second branch I wanted to go off of, that kind of relates to we can segue into the next topic as well, is the conversation that Earl McClellan, Chris Durso, Jeremy Foster, and I can't remember the other individual.
Jeremy Rollins, I believe.
Okay.
Rollins.
They had a conversation week or two ago about everything that's going on. And Earl shared a story of something that he went through with his son.
Yeah.
One day he was just kind of scratching at his hand, and he asked his dad, "Oh, does this?" I was just trying to see if this like black comes off, and everyone at that time on the live stream in the conversation, just like their face immediately just like was downcast, and they started crying and everything like that. And so I think that and what you talked about in terms of struggling with like presumption can be stemmed from. One, I definitely think potentially is the fact that our society does glorify more fair-skinned people.
I was just about to talk about that.
I definitely think that's something that it can be rooted from because, and I mean, this is a much deeper conversation because it gets into the actual mechanics of culture and what the purpose of it is.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I won't get into that because that's a very long conversation. But one of the other parts that I think this could be rooted from that I think is beneficial to bring up is the fact that all people groups can be racist against their own people group. There's a song by Dre Murray and Alex Faith called Overexposed that basically talks about this fact of like, let me pull up the lyrics here because I want to be able to quote them in this, of basically experiencing racism by your own race. And I will say, I think this is something that uniquely African Americans can experience, even within the own African American, like within that people group. You have this whole conversation against like more darker skinned African Americans and fairer skinned African Americans, and it's and in Dre Murray, what he says, which is related to that, is I see my brother's words as I travel through this land where the dark-skinned perish and the fair-skinned cherish, and that's within my own race. With that, I'm embarrassed. And so I think that's something that definitely, I don't know the degree to it, but that needs to be present within the conversation. It is just providing that full context of like, yeah, there's been a unique struggle in our country of whites being racist against African Americans and putting those systemic struggles in place to keep them behind. Again, I think that's another conversation to ask if those are still present today, but we're not going to have that conversation today. But there's also the part of like, there's racism within our own people groups. And that's something that potentially we need to address. I don't know if at first or at some point is a proper way to do it, but it's something to keep in the back of our mind so that we don't have this sort of like hypocrisy against other people groups.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, speaking to that, there's like an education that has to come, kind of like you said. Like, I don't even know if racism is the right word for that or if it's...
I think just prejudice.
That's probably the better word
it.
To phrase that.
Because, I mean, we talked about it in the first conversation.
Yeah.
Is I want to be very careful. I'm just using race in this context because that's what everyone is talking about.
Yeah, no,
but because Lisa Sharon Harper, which we talked about the first time around, talks about how race is a social construct, but ethnicity is something that's real. And so race is something that can be tied to other forms of ideology that are very dangerous, that we can talk about some other time. But yeah, I just want to say we're using race just for that.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, it's something that you definitely see where it's like, for example, like in the African American community where it's light skin, dark skin, whatever that might be, and because there was always this kind of thought, like you mentioned earlier, where as if those of fair skin are more beautiful than those that are darker skin, and which is unfortunate because I remember speaking to my niece about it, and it was something that she was going through her school and some of the boys or whatever. I don't know. I just decided to ask her about boys. She's in high school or whatever. And then we start having this conversation. And I remember just being so saddened by it because her and maybe some of her friends that were a little bit of a darker complexion felt not as beautiful because some of the other kids place more value or beauty or worth, I guess, on those of more of a fair skin.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's just something that comes with education, I believe, like we mentioned earlier, from that individual, on an individual level, that's something that goes towards the family, where we have to be able to teach our children what beauty is. We have to be able to teach our children what their value is, what their worth is, so that they don't necessarily get crushed whenever these moments present themselves. Because in that moment, all I could do was reinforce her value and beauty in her own skin color, right? In her own skin, without her having to judge herself according to how maybe some of the other girls looked that didn't look like her, right? And so, really kind of just really reinforcing that in her to let her know, hey, you're beautiful the way that God created you, right? Yeah. And that's something that I remember Earl was speaking to his child, kind of just reinforcing that you're beautiful in the way that God made you, and you don't need to look like this, that, or the other, right? So it's almost in a sense learning to celebrate the way that God made us in our own skin without necessarily having to compare myself to somebody that looks different. Not just somebody that's white, but someone that's within my own community that looks a lot different than what I do. You know, so because the world does that, right? That's what the world does, where it's even within your own community, it wants to even separate you further, even within that. So
and I mean it's tough because there's so many different categories in terms of just being a human, and I wish that the color of someone's skin can go to the point of like, oh, you have a beard right now and I don't. Like it can get down to like that simple level, because I mean as well, like one of the things that I do want to quickly cover, because you mentioned it, that's kind of related to this, is this idea that's emerged of like subconscious bias or like unconscious bias, and that's something that's been talked about a lot, and that a lot of more, I'll say it, like more liberal companies have adopted. Companies such as Google, Fidelity, like others. And what studies have unfortunately shown, which I think can be partnered with your thought a little bit, because there's a unique way that we need to like pursue the education of this, because in the classes about like unconscious bias and things like that, studies have actually shown that it's made the unconscious bias worse because it's brought it from like your subconscious to your actual like awareness, and there's this pride that can kind of be there of wanting to be like, oh no, like I'm not flawed in that way, and so you kind of fight against it, which then kind of reinforces the bias a little bit. And so I don't really know what the best way is to pursue it. I mean, I think within our faith context, it's exactly what you said, of letting people know their individual worth, and then from there, trusting that that God has someone in their life that's going to actually see their beauty beyond the color of their skin, beyond whether they have a beard or not, or if they're 5 foot or 6 foot. But simply just trusting that, but then as well making sure to preserve people's individual. I need to be careful with this, but like preserving people's ability to have individual choices, on what they think beauty is. Because some people might like blue eyes, some people might like brown eyes.
Yeah.
But we need to make sure that perception of beauty isn't tainted by like unconscious bias and things like that. And so I think kind of going off of that, something that I know you want to talk about is how we think the church has reacted to all of this, whether it's the Ahmaud Arbery case, whether it's historically these types of struggles, or whether it's the George Floyd situation that's come up. So what are some things that you want to speak into that?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about just in terms of the church, and obviously scripture is always good. So
Amen.
I'm gonna read a couple scriptures. Here's Romans 2:10. It was speaking about a lot of other things, but the verse that I was kind of looking at, I can just read from verse 10.
Yeah.
It says, "But glory, honor, and peace to everyone who works what is good, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For there is no partiality with God." Right. So this is the point of emphasis that I want to make with that word partiality. And then we go to James chapter 3, verse 17 through 18. This is one of my favorite verses in the Bible, but it says, "But the wisdom," right? So we're speaking about wisdom. "The wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy."
Yeah.
Right. And so we keep seeing this word partiality. And so I looked it up. I was like, what does that mean? It says unfair bias in favor of one thing or person compared with another, favoritism. And so we just see that God is not like that.
Yeah.
Right. That's the if that's a big reveal for somebody, hey, that's a big reveal. But God doesn't have these biases that we do towards people.
Yeah.
Whether it is towards poor or rich, whether it is towards black, white, God doesn't have those things. And so we as children of God, as we continue to grow and mature, a word that you used earlier, sanctification, as we continue to grow and mature within our faith, this is our goal. This is what we're working towards, right? Because he says what? But the wisdom which is from above. So this is the wisdom that God is trying to give to us, right? First thing it is pure. Our hearts have to be pure. It is gentle. Right? It's peaceable. It says it's willing to yield, full of good fruits. It shows mercy. It's without hypocrisy. It's without partiality. And so this is what we're growing into and going towards the church. I don't even want to say a challenge, but this is what we're called to as believers, whether you're new in your faith, whether you've been in your faith for many, many years. We are all growing in different areas in our lives. And if, let's just say, hey, maybe you don't feel like you're racist, right?
Yeah.
But let's just say you kind of grew up with these little biases that you've had just while growing up, which is fair because a lot of people grew up that way, on every side, right? We're growing towards removing those things because we want to grow into the person of Christ even more, right? In our likeness. And so that's the goal of the church. And so I've loved seeing that leaders are stepping up and saying, hey, this is evil, right? Because a lot of people, for example, within the Black community, a lot of times it seemed whenever these issues have come up, it always seemed that the church was silent. It always seemed that the leaders that spoke to so much about spirituality and love and all these things, whenever these issues came up, they've always been silent. So, I mean, there's been, I've been scrolling through social media and different things like that and kind of seeing the responses from a lot of leaders, speaking up about this issue. It's something where it's like, wow, it's good to see, right? Because some people, they will leave the church if something like this happened at church. I mean, the pastor is silent about it. They don't mention anything about it. You don't speak about it, but every other issue you want to speak about, except for this one, right? And so for me, it's been awesome seeing that people are responding, not just people on the outside, but even within the church where we're kind of focusing on right now. For me, it's been awesome seeing men and women of God speak out on the issues, knowing that they have a platform, knowing that people listen to them, knowing that, quote unquote, they could lose something, worldly things, I guess you could call them, but God honors the heart. God honors truth and all that. So I've just kind of love seeing that, the stances that a lot of people are taking and just really speaking out against something that's so evil, that is so unfortunately still present. I've been calling it
Yeah.
dealing with the elephant in the room, right? We're in a place where we had to deal with this elephant in the room. And so, but yeah, I mean, I feel like the church, we had to learn to love one another, right? You have to learn to love your neighbor. And so the people try to trick Jesus up. They're like, well, who's our neighbor? And Jesus is like, you guys are not about to trick me. And so there we get
Yep.
that story with the Good Samaritan. And so from that, Jesus really emphasizes that whoever's around you is your neighbor,
Yeah.
right? Whoever's around you, no matter how they look, they're your neighbor, right? And you have to be able to love them, right? And there's no partiality with God, and so there can't be partiality with us either. And so that's kind of some of the things that I wanted to bring
Yeah.
up.
And that's something I think it can, as far as what the church leaders are doing, like with Pastor Robert
Yeah.
and like Carrie Cody Carnes and all them, like that's something that I hope those who feel strong about this issue and that God has put it as a burden on, like a heavy burden on your heart, are able to see in this time.
Right.
Because like for me, again, I just have a limited perspective on things. I don't think I've seen one, like, and this is more going to like the George Floyd situation now.
Right.
I don't think I've seen a single person say that like this wasn't wrong. And I think that's a really good sign.
Yeah.
I think it may unfortunately also speak to like the degree of violence that
yeah.
was.
Yeah.
But I just hope that y'all or us who feel really heavy burdened about this are able to see that and are able to take encouragement from that. And that we're not so busy complaining or yelling about the situation that we're not able to see the people who have stood side by side with us through all of this.
Yeah.
Because that is something that I do fear, is that for all of us, that pride and anger can get in the way of us not seeing like everyone who's around. And I know that's something that Lecrae has talked about, is the importance of constructive anger rather than destructive anger.
Right.
And the fact that, a fruit of the Spirit is self-control.
Right.
And so even in the midst of our anger, we need to have self-control.
Yeah.
We can't sin on our anger, or sin because of our anger. I can't remember.
I think you said it right. Yeah.
Can't remember the right phrase with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something that, again, like I said earlier, it's been slow moving. But I definitely think the church leadership has been here through over this last probably week or so, more so than they have before.
Right.
And I like Pastor Robert. I remember he had a sermon, I think last year, that was talking about like a lot of this type stuff, and basically talking about like, hey, I have a limited perspective and I need to learn.
Right.
Yeah, and so
that. Yeah.
one of the things that like I texted our boy Montel Fish yesterday or 2 days ago, and I was like, hey man, like I'm just trying to learn, trying to process. I know you're processing too, but what do you think are some practical steps that we can take towards reconciliation and everything? And he's like, man, just make friends with different people, sit around the dinner table with them, and have fellowship.
It's good.
Because that was something that I had thought about with Rewards conversation, because he was talking about, why aren't Black individuals getting spots of like leadership within the church? And him and his buddy unfortunately like automatically assumes like racism or we didn't trust or the church leadership didn't trust African American individuals. Whenever me, I was like, no, like I know from the business world that the large majority of hirings and things like that come from networking. And so it's the fact that whites are not sitting with blacks are not sitting with whites, because it is both sides. Because I mean, you definitely see, in the cafeteria table, you see that from both sides. And so it's something that we both, like both sides, I shouldn't say both, all sides need to get out of that. All sides need to really be intentional about. Because that was something in high school that I was very intentional about, because I mean, I knew there was a couple kids who were kind of making jokes and things like that towards some of the African Americans who were on our football team. But I freaking loved them, man. Like they were made some of the best jokes, like some of the most kind people. And so, I mean, I made it very much a point for them to be my friends, for me to be able to learn from them. And that's where these kind of fears of the unfamiliar break down. Because I think that's part of what a racist tendency can be, is fear of the unfamiliar. And as we talk about in the book, and like the book that we're working on, and maybe have talked about before, is one of the ways that we grow in our faith is by going into the unknown and being able to pursue that, and discovering new parts of ourselves. And so I think that's definitely key to be able to get kind of through all of this and endure all of this. And so I think a couple quick things for us to talk about. I think we could just kind of do like a couple like quick, fast questions, and then go off of things from there, because I know we only have about 10 more minutes. But everything with George Floyd. So first off, just to make things clear, each of us will answer yes or no. Do we think him getting killed was good? No.
No.
Do we think the police officer getting arrested was good? Yes. Do we think the protests that have happened since are good? Well, the protest part.
Protest, yes. Protest, yes.
Now, to be very clear, do we think the riot part and looting is good? No. I think we all agree with that. And so from there, I think one of the things that I kind of wanted to cover with this is because I heard this from, actually it was a conversation I had with a friend yesterday, of like, man, I don't understand, for me, like I don't understand why looting becomes like a potential thing that people would want to do. Again, maybe they're just so angry that rationality gets thrown out the window. Of which, at that point, from our faith standpoint, we do need to have the self-control to and be willing to talk with the people, be like, hey, like this isn't helping anything. But as well, something that like my friend told me was like, no, like I just kind of think it just comes from the point of like, you know, we're so hurt that we're going to give you a taste of like your own medicine and like what we've been feeling. But I mean, there's a couple things from that are really tough, because a lot of the communities in which this happens in is not where the people live who they think the problem is caused by. But as well, this whole eye for an eye thing, like the Lord completely, or Jesus completely says like, that's not something that's good.
I mean, that's the part that's very interesting, that a lot of these things, people that are in those communities aren't usually the ones that are, you know, out there just doing all these crazy stuff, because they live in those communities, right? They need those stores to be open. But it always seems like whenever I like the fact that you made the distinction between the protests and then the riots, because there always seems to be those bad apples that are just there somehow magically. However, they end up there. They always end up there, and then it leads to something that's more than the people, right, that are protesting wanted. Because
Yep.
what that does is it takes away from the issue. We don't want to do things that take away from the issue at hand, which we're trying to protest currently. And
Yeah.
so, I actually had a friend that I was a part of a discipleship group with. He was out there in Austin,
Yeah.
and he got interviewed by, I don't know if it was CNN or one of those news channels
Yeah.
that was out there, and he just kept making that point of emphasis that, hey, listen, there are a lot of people out here that are doing good. People here that are stopping those individuals that are wanting to escalate things even further, right? There are a lot of people here that don't want this, right? I have another friend that I saw. He was it made me laugh, so I sent him a message. But he was leading the charge of the protesters
Yeah.
yesterday, and just seeing how they were using their voice. They weren't going around trying to destroy anything because we don't want to hurt the communities that we're living in,
Yep.
right? And so, just knowing that there are people there that are not that they don't have that intention of going out there to destroy and do this, that, and the other,
Yeah.
right? And so, kind of just knowing that there's two sides to that story, and
Yeah.
I mean, it's so unfortunate. There's so many individuals that they know that they can take advantage of this, right? And so they'll
Yeah.
cause even more destruction to happen, I guess you could say. So,
And that's another thing that, like, I don't know if it's just the general thought has been floated out there, or that, like, actual reporting has been done to say it was the case. But I mean, I know the thought has been floated out there that either, like, Antifa or, like, white supremacists or, like, cops invaded the protests to then cause it to be a riot.
yeah, I saw this video. I was like,
So something that I would very much encourage all of us to do, which goes towards something that we talked about previously, which I do love, is don't presume anything. Don't just take some narrative
yeah,
at face value as truth. I'd very much encourage each of us to do our own research
Yeah.
into everything, and look at multiple sources, because I think something as well that we can all agree on is the media in general is not doing a good job at all right now. And I think that goes to both sides of
Yeah.
either this this race conversation or, like, the kind of political conversation, but especially against the church, because the media does not like the church whatsoever. But it's something that yeah, I mean, I definitely, from, like, my conversations with people, which I think is the best thing to do in this case, I definitely think that I see both sides of, like, African Americans feel that justice isn't being done, while the, like, whites feel like everything's being blamed on us. Whenever I've just chilled at my home, worked remote for the past 2 weeks, and so again, I think that speaks towards these grand narratives,
Yeah.
that we need to be careful with. But yeah, I mean, be an individual. God made you an individual. Come to your own conclusions, which I think is where discernment comes from. And be willing to put in the time if you really do care about these situations.
Yeah.
Understand that on all sides of the conversation, the enemy is trying to deceive us. And it's something that we need to be very careful about, to do our own research to understand the proper context of things.
Right.
And so from there, we can come to a proper, again, judgment
Yeah.
of what's going on and what we should really do and everything like that. But yeah, I mean, I think we would both agree, though. There's a lot of issues going on today.
Yeah.
And that is a result of this being, unfortunately, a fallen world,
Yeah.
a sinful world. and kind of going back around to something that, like I said in the first part of our conversation, is like, I think we really need to have, as far as Christians go, like we need to have the proper hope in this.
Yeah.
Is remember that Jesus promises that he's going to come back and have a new earth and a new heavens. And until then, we have to develop patient suffering while loving the people around us. Because that's the only way that people are going to see Jesus, which at the end of the day, if we really believe what our faith says, is what we should want.
Yeah.
Is for people to come to know the Father so that they can be with us in heaven whenever all of this is not a freaking thing.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the big point of emphasis, kind of like you mentioned, this having love for a neighbor. I think that's something that we, as believers, we need to grow into even more. And hopefully as we love our neighbors, love our neighbors, as Christ has loved us, the hope is that the world will also be able to see that, and that's going to be able to bring more into the family of God. And so that's the hope, that's the prayer, and also just knowing that as an individual, as a group, as the body of Christ, we're placed here according to 2 Corinthians chapter 5 as ambassadors to the kingdom of God, and we have a simple message, and the message to reconcile people back to God. And so we can't reconcile people that we hate. You know, how could you love God who you don't see when you hate your neighbor whom you do see, right? So we can't reconcile people that we hate. Like Chase said, we got to be able to get into different people's worlds. So I had to be able to get into my neighbor's world that doesn't look like me, that might not think like me. I had to be able to sit down, have a conversation, have a meal with them.
Yeah.
Jesus did that all the time.
And something,
right?
so going along with that, I mean, Jesus sat with sinners.
Yeah.
And something that hit me while I was in the line at Cane's before this was...
Shout out to Cane's.
A sponsor us.
Yeah, I know, right?
It is our responsibility as Christians to be the ones who have a level head enough to have a conversation about these things. Everyone else is going to get heated around us because they don't have this fruit of self-control.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we need to be really have as a focus.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple, we didn't get to one of the topics that we wanted to talk about, but I think we'll do a separate conversation about that one. But just some last minute prefaces wouldn't be the correct word, but just disclaimers, I guess would be the right word. So I know that there will be people that say on both sides of this conversation to us, because this is the most topical conversation we've had yet, and potentially like the most controversial. And so there will be a lot of people that say, oh, you don't get it, you don't fully understand what's going on, like just stop, just shut up, everything like that. Here's the thing. You're right. You're right that neither one of us fully understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's why we're having a conversation. So we can learn from each other's perspectives, learn from each other's research that we've done and each other's experience, to learn and grow. And hopefully y'all who are listening at the same time are able to grow as well. That y'all are basically just kind of in the room with us while we're having this conversation. As well, for those of you who follow social media influencers or artists or things like that, chill out on them. Because I have seen so much, and I've heard so much from friends getting this feedback and almost backlash of, why haven't you spoke out about this yet? Well, the thing is, I kind of want to speak on a little bit, on their behalf. The thing is, this is a really, really tough situation. And it's a really tough situation to put into words. And people are really, really processing this and trying to figure out how to make things that are valuable creative and can resonate with people. Like I sent you that video from Montel, which I think is titled like "I'm Still in Love with You in the Midst of a Falling World," something like that, talking about like keeping our eyes on Jesus. But the thing is, I mean, like just have grace for them, because they have a lot more followers than you do. Therefore, their words have a lot more weight in the public's eye than the everyday person's does. And I know Montel posted this earlier and sent it over to me. It's on his story, but it says, "Don't ask people to always just speak up. Let people process and be with God." And there's this screenshot of "Hear my heart." Some folks, black, white, and others, haven't posted something about everything that's happening because they're weeping in pain, praying, seeking wisdom, counsel, and having healthy, hard conversations behind the scenes. Be mindful of pressuring people to post when they just aren't ready to. Some people need to grieve, process, work through their own feelings with the Holy Spirit as they ask the Holy Spirit for what he wants them to do in this moment. Just pray, ask God for his heart, his justice, repentance, and healing of our land. And so I think that goes for all of us. Definitely just show people grace in this time while due process is done for this situation and justice is pursued. But yeah, dude, I just really want to thank you for opening up and just kind of talking about this. Because, yeah, I mean, I know it's a tough time for all of us, but I mean, for you as well, especially. But yeah, dude, it definitely means a lot for me, for us to be able to talk through this and know that like we can sit down and have these types of conversations.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good to, like you said, just sit down and have conversations and just reiterate what Chase was saying. We've always said since the beginning we don't know everything, and especially in this conversation, there's a lot more that goes into all of this, and we didn't touch everything. We just touched a few things, and so we hope that those things that we did touch on, that you guys can appreciate those things, and we'll still grow. We'll do more research. We'll learn more. Because I think as people, we're continuing to grow and understand more. We knew more than we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
We're not even 30 yet.
Yeah, we're not even 30 yet. So we're still forming our opinion, but we just wanted to share. We're just wanting to have that conversation and hope that, like Chase said, you guys can be in a room with us and just listen, share the conversation, talk about it with others. Like, wow, these guys are crazy. I don't know what they're talking about, right? Or, hey, maybe these guys might be right. And so that's just the hope in all of this, and just to really speak about real world issues that are currently happening in this country right now. So hopefully this conversation was very insightful.
Yeah. But awesome, man. I'm going to pray us out just real quick.
Yeah.
Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for this space. Thank you for your Holy Spirit, so that we just be calm while having these conversations, just be willing to learn and see the experiences that you've given others, which allows us all to grow. Just in the midst of everything that's going on in this world, here in America, Brazil, Hong Kong, just all over the place, just bring your peace, bring your reconciliation, bring your grace, bring your love, and most of all, just bring your presence. Just be here with us and allow us just to have the endurance to get through to when you're going to be returning. So we love you. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Love you, dude.
Yeah.